Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jane Bonzo, and I work in the Care Management Unit here at the Ohio Department of Medicaid. Welcome, and thank you for attending ODM's webinar series. This webinar is being recorded for future viewing. A link to the webinar recording, along with a copy of the presentation slides, will be provided via email at a later date. You do not need to sign in for attendance purposes or include your name if you have a question. Please send all questions through the comment box. We will leave time at the end to answer those questions, so please continue to submit those throughout the presentation. The views and opinions shared by outside entities do not necessarily reflect the official policy or positions of the Ohio Department of Medicaid. Today, we are grateful to host representatives from Jewish Family Services and the Ohio Department of Aging to present Do You Really Know Me? Stories of Survivors of Nazi Persecution. Before we welcome our guests, Ohio Department of Medicaid Director Corcoran wanted to share a message with all of you.
Hello, my name is Maureen Corcoran. I'm the Director of the Ohio Department of Medicaid, and I want to thank you for participating in today's webinar. We're pleased to work with Jewish Family Services to gain a better understanding of what is being done and how we can best help support Holocaust survivors in our state. Jewish Family Services has been a leader in our community, and particularly your support and services to both survivors and their caregivers. In our community and in our world today, we're only beginning to understand the significant implications that trauma has on individuals and their families, both short-term and in a very long-term and real way. This is something that your community has known and lived with for generations. This webinar then is important not only for the work that you're doing and our responsibility collectively to Holocaust survivors and their caregivers, but also the important learnings for all others that we support who also have experienced trauma. Thank you again for participating.
So today I'd like to extend a warm welcome to our first presenter, Dan Seguin from the Ohio Department of Aging. Thank you for joining us today.
Hello, everybody. My name is Dan Seguin, and I'm with the Ohio Department of Aging. I want to welcome you to today's webinar. Over the past few months, I have had the privilege to work with and learn from the team that you're going to hear from today. I've learned so much from them, and I am positive that you will also take many things away with you today. I'm really happy so many of you have been able to join us today, and my hope is that you're able to settle in and get comfortable and immerse yourself in this presentation. But before I introduce the team, I wanted to take just a minute to tell you how we got to today. The first driving factor for this webinar is in the U.S., there's a federal initiative aimed at providing comprehensive services for older adults called the Older Americans Act. This act requires the Ohio Department of Aging to create a state plan every 4 years. The plan we developed includes the goals we want to reach and the objectives we would like to move forward for older Ohioans, especially those older Ohioans who are the most vulnerable, those with the greatest economic need, the greatest social needs, and those at risk for institutional placements. When the Older American Act was reauthorized in 2016, the Act asked that we include an additional truly vulnerable population in our outreach and our service strategies, older adults that now live in the U.S. that are survivors of the Holocaust. The second driving factor for this webinar came from a meeting between the Ohio Department of Aging State Long-Term Care Ombudsman, Bev Laubert, and the Chief Executive Officer of Jewish Family Services here in Columbus, Ohio, Dr. June Gutterman. Their idea was to put this team and this presentation together, and they wanted you to join us as a critically important audience because of the work that you do. The team you hear from today provides services to survivors, and they will help us understand the unique needs and challenges of serving Holocaust survivors and their caregivers, with their focus on mental and physical health, nutrition, transportation, caregiver support, outreach, and legal services, all from a foundation that utilizes person-centered, trauma-informed approaches. They will tell you more about themselves, but I have the pleasure of introducing Garrett Ray, Liz Hutchinson, Mary King, and Deborah Moscardino of Jewish Family Services of Columbus, Ohio.
Hi, my name is Garrett Ray. I'm the Director of Senior and Holocaust Services at Jewish Family Services in Columbus, Ohio. A little bit about my background. I worked for the Wounded Warrior Project in Washington, D.C. for 5 years with soldiers and Marines. After that, I moved to Ohio and I worked for a nonprofit organization in Northeast Ohio called Hattie Larlam. There I worked with individuals with developmental disabilities. After that, I worked at Jewish Family Services in Cleveland and then Columbus, and I've been working with seniors and Holocaust survivors for the past 6 years.
Good afternoon. I'm Debbie Moscardino, and I'm a geriatric case manager for Jewish Family Services. I come from a home and community-based service background, and I spent 34 years with the Ohio Department of Medicaid. I'm really real old. I also did healthcare consulting for several years, and my retirement job is with Jewish Family Service and working with Holocaust survivors and other seniors in our community that are struggling in their aging years.
Hi, I'm Liz Hutchison. I am also a geriatric case manager with Jewish Family Services, and I work directly with Holocaust survivors in our program. I've only been working at Jewish Family Services the past year, but during my senior year of college, I interned with Jewish Family Services, and I've been here since.
Good afternoon. My name is Maureen King. I'm the coordinator for Project Ariel. I've been with Jewish Family Services for the last 3 years, but I've been working with Holocaust survivors in the survivor community for almost 20 years. I've helped to work on programs for Columbus Public Schools, working to introduce Holocaust education to junior high and high school students, and also to help continue to keep our survivors active in the school districts, and so that children learn their stories personally, because they learn the best from the people that actually lived those tales.
All right, I want to thank you again for participating in this webinar. I'm just going to go over the goals for this webinar. First goal is to recognize the number of Holocaust survivors in the U.S. and in the state of Ohio, explore the definition of a Holocaust survivor, understand the survivors experience traumatic childhood regardless of where they lived during the war, consider how the aging process is affecting survivors of Nazi persecution, understand the sensitivities and tailored services that can help support survivors and their caregivers, and how they're working with survivors can inform working with others who have experienced the same traumas and similar traumas. And next, we're going to show a video of the CEO, Dr. June Gutterman, and she will talk a little bit about Holocaust survivors and how their traumas tie into other populations.
I'm June Gutterman, and I am the CEO of the organization. I want to talk to you for a few minutes today about serving survivors of Nazi persecution and why it is so important that we not only provide services, but we learn about what survivors of intense trauma have gone through and how it impacts them as they age. So briefly, there are today 227 survivors of Nazi persecution in Columbus, Ohio. Worldwide, there are around 200,000, 250,000 across the globe. Approximately 25% of all survivors live in North America. So Columbus has, as I said, 227. These are people who are deemed survivors by the German government, specifically by the Claims Conference, an entity that provides support to survivors across the world, and they define who a survivor is, and they grant survivor status to individuals, which leads to reparation and also some modicum of home care. So, what do we know about the survivors in Columbus, Ohio? Approximately out of the 227, 160 of them are living in poverty, some were less than $15,000 per year. These individuals came to Columbus in their mid-60s from the former Soviet Union. So they've been here about 15 to 20 years. They speak a little English. They came here impoverished from the former Soviet Union. Did not have time to build a life here, build an economic sustainability. Survivors from what you would typically think the Holocaust, those people that you would mention were death camps or hiding in the forest or human transport, came here earlier. They came right after the war between 1946 and 1950. They were younger and they grew economic root down, built families, and learned language. So we have two different populations. But across those two populations, there's a great amount of things that are in common. We know that survivors never process the trauma of the Holocaust and what happened. So we know that individuals who don't process trauma, that trauma just doesn't go away. As they age, their ability to compartmentalize the trauma is what disappears. The trauma itself comes to the fore. We do everything we can in this organization to help people learn how to cope with trauma by providing person-centered care. We provide a lot of anxiety reduction. We provide socialization. We provide a lot of different services that help the individual and the family members cope with trauma. But one of the most important things we do is we assure the best that we can that our survivors stay out of institutional settings, i.e. nursing homes, rehab centers. We do everything we can to provide services in the home. We do that because we know that survivors who go into institutional settings have a greater tendency to experience flashbacks. Institutional settings are places where individuals give up a good bit of their independence. They're fragile, and both of those things to a survivor were the vehicles to death. When you were fragile, when you were sick, when you no longer had independence, having to die through the Holocaust. So we do everything that we can humanly possibly do to keep our survivors at home and wrap all the support we can around them. We need your help to do it. Not only is it important for us to do this for our survivors, but we know that there are other people in our community who moved here, who are refugees, who fled from horrific situations in Africa and in Bhutan and other places across the world, where they have also not processed trauma, and as they age, they will experience many of the same things that our Holocaust survivors experience. So for us, learning, working with our survivors is important. Taking what we've learned and applying it to other populations is an imperative for us. We need your help. We need to be able to work with you in order to access the government hours that are much needed, but we can supplement with hours from the German government to assure that individuals can get care at home and get the care that they needed to maintain, to live out their lives and be with.
So the first goal was to explain who is a Holocaust survivor. And this definition comes from the German government and the Conference on Jewish Material Claims Against Germany, which is the claims conference, who actually negotiates with the German government for all the funding that a lot of the Jewish family services receive to provide case management, home care, financial assistance, food assistance, all the assistance that someone would need to continue to live independently in their home. So the definition, as you can see on this slide, states there's two ways of looking at it. So there's the European ones who were in the concentration camps, the ghettos, and there also is later on they identified a lot of the survivors from the former Soviet Union that were not in concentration camps, but they were in hiding. They were persecuted in similar ways, but when they fled, they went to Russia, and they had to really suffer more traumas after being under, the Russian regime. So the definition is any Jew who was persecuted as a Jew in Germany, Austria, or any other country occupied by the Nazis or their Axis allies from 1933 to 1945, or who immigrated from any other countries recognized by the Claims Conference of Jewish Material Claims against Germany after 1933 and before liberation, and suffered recognized persecution. And as I stated before, not all Holocaust survivors were in concentration camps. Now we're going to look at where Holocaust survivors are in the United States. 22% of living Holocaust survivors in the world live in North America. States with the largest numbers of Holocaust survivors include New York, California, Florida, Ohio, New Jersey, Maryland, and Illinois. In Ohio specifically, the majority of Holocaust survivors live in metropolitan areas. You can see the numbers there. The largest in Ohio is the Cleveland area with 721, Columbus with 227, Cincinnati with 193. There are Holocaust survivors all over the state, Akron-Canton area, Dayton, and Toledo. And one thing I wanted to just say about these numbers is the numbers do not decrease as often as you would think with Holocaust survivors. The youngest Holocaust survivor is 74 years old. There's a lot of individuals who have not applied for the claims conference for many reasons. Some of the reasons is they just never wanted to apply because it is a traumatic experience. The application process is very thorough. They have to basically retell their story, find the documentation to say where they were, what they experienced. And now they're coming to us. They're either financially need the assistance. The claims conference does provide pensions if they were in a ghetto or a camp. And there are also a lot of services that the claims conference provides, and I'll get into that here in a little bit. So the Holocaust survivors as immigrants, when they came to the United States, the Eastern European ones that were persecuted, they were in camps. They were from Hungary, Romania, Poland. They came to the United States right after World War II, beginning in December of 1945. As Dr. Gutterman stated in her video, they came to America at a younger age. They had time to establish their roots. They had careers here. They learned the language. The Holocaust survivors from the former Soviet Union, the first wave of immigration was 1970, but it was very small. The large wave of immigration began in 1989 and through the 90s. And that's where we see a lot of our Holocaust survivors in the Columbus area. They still speak Russian. They don't feel comfortable speaking English, especially to those that they don't have trust with. They also never worked here. So a lot of them are living in poverty. They're living in rough neighborhoods. They need the assistance. So Holocaust survivors' economic considerations. So this is where it comes. You can really see the poverty levels for the survivors from the former Soviet Union. 75% are at or below the poverty line in Ohio. A majority of that percentage are from the former Soviet Union. They just came here. They were older. They did not work. If they did work, they only really worked maybe 10 years when they came to the United States. The services that they need and that most of them receive, Social Security, energy assistance program, home delivered meals, transportation. I would say home care is in there. All the in-home supports, that can keep them living independently in their homes, so they don't have to go into the institutions where trauma triggering events may happen. So I was in a conference for the claims conference in Atlanta, Georgia last month, and there was a study that came out that said that Holocaust survivors are living 7 years longer than their peers. There's a lot of reasons for this. One is that they survived the Holocaust and they're continuing to survive through many challenges. The second one is there's so many supports now, thanks to publicly funded dollars and also through the claims conference, where they're able to have, up to 40 hours of home care, to even up to 24/7, depending on their level of persecution. They also are just a lot of social events. They're feeling a sense of community now. You can see on that slide, it says number of survivors are decreasing, but the number of survivors needing help is increasing. So as they're aging, they need more supports. It's getting more expensive to provide those supports. Many who did not identify as Holocaust survivors now are coming forward. I spoke on that a little earlier. We're seeing a lot of survivors, and that's something that we have to justify to our funders, is why are these numbers not dropping? We see that Holocaust survivors are passing away. Columbus in particular, we're seeing Holocaust survivors moving to Columbus because they have family here. And there's also Holocaust survivors that are coming forward now that actually need the assistance, so they're going through the application process through the claims conference. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the claims conference and what they do. Their goal is to provide a measure of justice for Jewish Holocaust survivors and to provide them with the best possible care. So some of the benefits that a Holocaust survivor receives from the claims conference is direct payments from the German government. As you can see, there's 80 countries and territories. One thing through the Older Adults Act is any pension that they receive through the claims conference, because they're identified as a Holocaust survivor, does not count as income. So they wouldn't have to use that as, to show on their taxes. The claims conference also helps more than 146,000 survivors in 47 countries with home care, food, medicine, medical care, dental care, transportation, legal aid, and socialization. And there's around 250 partner organizations that provide the services and funding. So there's a lot of factors that determine the eligibility for Holocaust survivors. So the public funded dollars, as you see there, government hours. So through the claims conference, they have their own diagnostic report that the case managers do to figure out their functionality score. And then there's also another dynamic which they just started, which is their persecution level, which is a terrible thing to say, but the German government actually used to only provide 25 hours max. Now they can do 24/7. But what they're willing to provide is determined by what they experienced during the wartime. So trying to have that conversation with a Holocaust survivor who needs 24/7 care, but because they were only in hiding and they weren't in a camp, they're only eligible for 40 hours from the claims conference. Their financial status also is a determining factor. As I said, their wartime experience and their housing situation. So the claims conference cannot provide home care hours to them if they're in a facility, even assisted living or a nursing home. One thing that I do want to state before we go forward is the importance of working, if you're working with a Holocaust survivor, to work with their case manager at the Jewish Family Service that they are working with. The claims conference has a strict audit procedure, and they need to see proof of what the Holocaust survivor is receiving that are publicly funded hours. So they want to see on the care plan how many hours a week that they're getting from the waiver programs, or here in Franklin County, the senior option home care hours. So they want to see that because those hours are deducted by their eligible hours to determine what the claims conference is willing to pay for. And if you ever have questions about that, always reach out to someone from Jewish Family Services and they can help explain that. The rules are always changing, as in all different agencies, so sometimes it can get very confusing. So now we're going to get into the importance of tailored services and sensitivities. Really, a lot of agencies have been moving towards the person-centered trauma-informed care approach, just respecting the unknown, what happened to you, rather than what is wrong with you, asking the questions and listening, just maximizing the self-determination and choice of the individual. And just really, it's just learning about the trauma so you can understand what someone went through, understand their experiences, and just be very sensitive of what they've went through, how they're maturing through that process so you don't re-trigger them. So here are some triggers and symptoms of Holocaust survivors. Some of the triggers are writing wills, planning funerals. One of those triggers is just the death aspect. One reason is a lot of Holocaust survivors never experienced their family members aging because they passed away when they were kids. So they don't even know the process of why would you write a will? How does a funeral? What is the whole point of planning that? Relocation to a new home, assisted living, and or nursing home. So that's the whole goal of Jewish Family Services and the Claims Conference, is to make sure that Holocaust survivors are living out their lives independently in their home with dignity. Saying goodbyes, parting ways, losing friends, strict routines and time schedules, waiting in lines or waiting for food. Just an example of that is like going to the doctor. Sometimes they can wait for hours, their transportation's not showing up, it makes them very anxious. Waiting for food is one. When we take them to the farmer's market to get, or the coupons for the farmer's market, they want to be there 2 hours before they're actually distributing them because they're afraid they're going to run out and they will not be able to go to the farmer's market. Hospitalizations, getting a haircut, disrobing, and nakedness, disclosing medical history, and aging, which basically all of the triggers that we've seen is during the aging process. And that's why right now is the time, it's just working with them, making them understand that just because they're aging does not mean that their independence is going to be taken away from them. Some of the symptoms that they get: sleep disturbance and nightmares, anxiety and agitation, paranoia, depression and despair, delayed PTSD, obsession with death, separation anxiety, and excessive guilt. Just make sure that the individual is always feeling safe and in control and understand what they've been through. So the person-centered trauma-informed care conclusion when dealing with Holocaust survivors is Holocaust survivors are resilient and have been able to adjust to various environments. Minimizing avoidable triggers by providing person-centered trauma-informed care reduces re-traumatization and allows survivors to cope and feel in control in their lives. And that's a picture there you can see is some of our local survivors in the Columbus area during Victory Day in 2018. So the importance of collaborative relationships. Trauma-informed practices involve just really working with the client and sharing that power. I think it's always giving them a choice, letting them know that they're still in control of their lives is very important for them to gain trust with you, and they're really going to open up once they gain that trust. Here it says, like, the survivor must have a significant role in planning and evaluating the services they receive. Survivors' preferences should be heard and honored when possible. there's a lot of confusion, I think, when a lot of our Holocaust survivors meet with, a case manager, or they receive something in the mail, especially with the language barrier. So it's just very good to maybe take a little extra time and work with them so they don't get that anxious feeling that, a service is going to be taken away from them or they're going to lose their money. And if you ever have questions with that, always contact. There's a lot of collaboration that should be taken in consideration with their other case managers who's working. And it shows there are local organizations like local Jewish Family Services, local synagogues, and local Jewish community centers. They can all help you understand the culture, maybe even some of the traumas of each individual. Next is Debbie's going to talk a little bit about the benefits of aging in place.
Thank you. As you all know, aging in place is optimum for all of us, but for Holocaust survivors, it's especially important not to be removed from familiar and trusted surroundings. For Holocaust survivors, the removal from one's home can cause re-traumatization. Because English is not their primary language, moving to an institutional setting where they're not able to communicate is dehumanizing and devastating. The loss of personal independence with little or no control over your situation can be reminiscent of losses that they've experienced in their lifetimes through the war years. Having to live with other people without your own belongings or familiar surroundings can cause flashbacks. Institutional admission procedures, uniformed staff, sterile medical environments, procedural practices such as showers and regimented schedules and routines are all restrictions of movement. It's a lack of privacy, and even waiting in line for food can trigger traumatic episodes and cause behavioral anxiety. Next. As human beings, our coping mechanisms are built upon trust with others and feeling of security. However, many of our survivors are suspicious of strangers and authority figures and have difficult building trust relationships. This requires you as the case manager to identify pragmatic solutions to address the barriers and obstacles of aging in place. While survivors may pursue services, they may not disclose their survivor status out of fear. In fact, many still avoid asking for needed assistance, thus making the task of reaching out to them even more challenging. Here is where listening for what is not being said is critical. Survivors frequently learn of services by word of mouth from other survivors in their community. Therefore, materials available in Russian and communities that offer accessible gathering places and affordable and reliable transportation make aging in place easier for this vulnerable population. Okay. Participants in the Holocaust Survivor Program eat very healthy, they exercise, they practice holistic health care. However, their trust of our country's physical healthcare system is a real barrier to good health. Many survivors are hesitant to open up and discuss their health concerns, and so the case manager may not be told of issues to assist with getting the client to the appropriate medical professional. This goes back to that feeling of not wanting anyone to perceive them as being weak, because weakness was a detriment during the war. This slide suggests that healthcare providers may benefit from understanding of their patients' life experiences and the role the case manager plays to help connect the dots for service providers. Case managers may benefit from identifying clients who require such considerations and assist the healthcare provider, as well as advocate for your client with physical health issues. And then it's important to work with other case managers, translators, and other health professionals. And language is a big barrier, and cultural understanding is a big barrier. Okay. Again, signs of weakness during the war were detrimental as survivors are hesitant to say anything negative about themselves that would indicate that they're unable to manage. Survivors are distrustful of medical professionals and fear of the stigma that experiencing problems or institutionalization, that they might result in institutionalization. Mental health issues may be containable and managed until the normal aging process happens, and our brains no longer allow us to properly process such thoughts. Our childhood memories become the only recall our aging brains have as the ability to produce. For survivors of Nazi persecution, those were not nice memories, and our executive functioning is no longer able to contain or filter our actions. Many survivors suffer from late onset of post-traumatic stress syndrome. Go ahead.
And I'm going to talk about paid supports. I'm Liz Hutchison again. I'm a case manager and works with Holocaust survivors. So something to remember and to keep in mind about when choosing paid supports for this population is that the need for a caregiver can sometimes be demoralizing and triggering for our Holocaust survivors. And paid caregivers, such as family members and home health aides, who can help provide vulnerable but valuable information on survivors' wellness status to case managers. They interact with the survivors on a weekly basis, and they'll notice changes in the survivor's wellness. Careful selection of caregivers who work with Holocaust survivors is essential. Consider paid supports language skills to increase the chances of building trust with the survivor, and also having an understanding of the Holocaust, Judaism, cultural sensitivities, and common triggers of the survivors is helpful. And training on kosher practices as well can be helpful when selecting paid support. And though understanding family involvement, though most of our Holocaust survivors have small extended families due to family members dying during the Holocaust, the relationships between survivors and their existing family members can sometimes be complex. Because the extent of survivors' trauma, it's possible that survivors may have never shared their experiences during the war with their family. But for the family members who they have shared their experience with, the family members who are aware, they may experience secondary traumatic stress themselves, and can be overprotective of the survivor, and may want to prevent any perceived or real discomfort that their family member may be experiencing. They may feel that they're not doing enough for their parent, no matter what they do, and they can sometimes avoid having conversations relating to end-of-life planning to avoid a triggering event for the survivor. Some survivors may be so distrustful outside help from family members that they may feel they must provide full-time care themselves, and they might not seek outside support or assistance, which can weigh a lot on the family members who are there to help. Survivors' grown children today are in their middle ages. They're in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, and are often involved in providing caregiving, transportation, and emotional support to their parents. The children of survivors often feel a strong sense of obligation to protect their parents from further suffering, and the feelings can result in conflicts between siblings and other family members at times. On occasion, allegations of mistreatment or exploitation can sometimes arise, and the children of Holocaust survivors can experience secondary trauma from their parents, like I said before. Nutrition considerations. Food holds special significance for survivors who often faced hunger and starvation throughout the Holocaust. Behaviors like hoarding or hiding food. Survivors may experience panic when they begin to feel low blood pressure or hunger pains. Some survivors may eat cold or old or spoiled food as opposed to disposing of it, throwing it away can become a triggering event. Staff delivering food should try to keep a consistent schedule and call if they'll be late to avoid triggering survivors, like when people are delivering Meals on Wheels, to just be aware of that. And like Garrett mentioned before, waiting in line to receive food either in a cafeteria or a food gathering site or a food pantry, or signing up to receive services such as home delivered meals or SNAP benefits can be re-traumatizing for the survivors as well.
Hi, I'm Mary King, and again, I'm the coordinator for Project Ariel. Project Ariel is a socialization and transportation program that we have here in the Columbus area for our local Holocaust survivors. One of the biggest things that we have found to help Holocaust survivors is to continue to have enjoyment in life. And so what we try and do is provide life-enriching destinations for them, where we transport them to museums, to movies, to restaurants, to parks, and all sorts of different events here in the Central Ohio area. We personally do not provide transportation, but we've worked with a number of transportation companies, and we've learned through a process that even within transportation, it's something that they so desperately need, but we need to be extremely careful to not turn a transportation situation into a re-triggering event for them. Typically, we do use larger buses and vans, oftentimes outfitted with wheelchair ramps and lifts. We generally encourage the survivors to use the lifts, and we make sure that the drivers understand that the population that they're working with has special needs. We ask drivers to always be very careful, never to do a count off. Like, don't say, count off your number. Don't line people up. Don't feel like you have to grab a hold of them by the arm and help them on. We really do encourage the drivers to be a little more relaxed about things. They know when there's somebody that didn't get back on the bus. You know, we often do is we will have the survivors, when they first board the bus, we ask them to sign in, just so that we have a record that they're there, and then whoever's chaperoning with them will then continue to make sure at each stop that everybody gets back on the bus again without having to go through a formal 1, 2, 3 kind of a count, because that just sets everybody on edge. They feel once again that you know, they're, oh, you know, the Nazis are here, they're making sure that we're here. So we also ask that case managers actually take the time and find out if the person has a preference for transportation. Some of our survivors are very, very nervous when they're placed in a large vehicle. It brings back memories of transport situations and things like that. A personal example was we actually ran a train program last year, and we were a little skeptical about it because so many survivors have horrific thoughts about being transported on trains. But a number of them wanted to go down to the Hocking Hills to see the leaves change. So we set up a trip for them, and some did come back when we sent out the invitations, but I'll never get on a train again for the rest of my life. How could you even think of it? But a number of them were like, well, if you're going to be there, then we know it's okay. So that also helps to establish the fact that they need to have someone that they really trust. So it's important to work with the same bus transportation company so that the survivors know who is coming to pick them up, that the survivor can have a name of a person, that they see that it's Bill who's driving today and they recognize Bill, so that they have that sense of continuity with the company. So also, some of the things that we always think of was the dignity, the safety, the trustworthiness, choice, collaboration, and empowerment when it comes to Holocaust survivors. Simon Wiesenthal has a very famous quote, and I'll read it. The Holocaust was not only a Jewish tragedy, but also a human tragedy. And it continues to span generations to come. We talk about secondary survivor trauma with children, and now we're seeing it even on a third generation with grandchildren. That there are things that happened, 70 years ago now, but that's still being passed down within family history. We've also have other vulnerable populations that have gone through very similar traumas with through the ACEs, the adverse childhood experiences. They also have very similar traumas, and we're starting to see this again with the influx of immigrants from war-torn countries. Again, there's very similar traumas that happen. And sometimes the trauma that they suffered doesn't actually come out until they're aging, because they're losing control. And before they were able to hide things and push it down under, where now as they're getting older, they can no longer push it under, and it's coming out.
So I just want to finish up before we take questions. What we've learned by working with Holocaust survivors and with their trauma, we've also seen with refugee population, youth fostering out of foster care. There's a lot of populations that have experienced traumas. I think all of us realize we all suffer from traumas. So the more understanding of person-centered trauma care and services will be very beneficial, not just to Holocaust survivors, but to all the populations that you serve.
So we haven't received any questions throughout the presentation, so we'll give it a minute, and if anyone would like to submit a question for our group here today, we would love to take that for you. Okay, well, I don't think there are any questions, but there is contact information in the slides here, so if there are follow-up questions. Oh, I spoke too soon. I think we have one.
We just got a couple of questions came in. Is there any way to identify the member as a Holocaust survivor?
So what I would say is, you know, a big part is as you're working with the individual is as listening is like number one thing. If they're starting to bring up like where they're from and some of their experiences when they were younger, if they start bringing up, you know, dates and times during World War II, and they say that they're Jewish, I think that would be a time where you could ask if, you know, if they've ever applied for compensation through the claims conference. If they say they haven't, I would reach out to the closest Jewish Family Services to you, and they can work as a partner with you to go through the application process. It doesn't hurt just to apply. I know it's traumatic. There are a lot of individuals who believe that they're Holocaust survivors, and they apply and they get declined, and we keep trying. I mean, the more information that we get and we send out is more beneficial. So sometimes the first round of application process doesn't work. There's times we've done it 4 times because we got more documentation and things like that. So it's definitely, if you would believe that, or if an individual tells you that they're a Holocaust survivor, always work with your local Jewish Family Service.
Okay, we have a couple more. Have you ever had LGBT Holocaust survivors apply for services? If so, how do you or would you ensure that they receive LGBT culturally competent services and support?
I do not know if we've ever served a Holocaust survivor from the LGBTQ community, but our agency does serve that population, so we would definitely make sure that they're served appropriate.
We have a request for the copy of the slides, and we will send those out following the presentation. We had another question. Could you review the information regarding trauma that is passed down through generations?
The trauma that's passed down through generations typically, oftentimes is within the relationships between the parent and the child. you'll find that parents frequently are afraid to live there, even their adult children, to go away, to move out of town, to start their own lives. They need to know at all times where that child is, and that visits down to the third generation and things like that. Food also is a huge issue, where kids that are raised here in the United States, the food has always been very easy to come by, and they don't understand why the mother is constantly needs 67 cans of green beans in the cupboard. There are times that we've walked into survivors' homes where there's just an incredibly large number of canned goods and cartons of eggs and gallons of milk, and you think, how can one person need this much food? But that's because during the war years they had nothing to eat. As a case manager, also coming into someone's home, oftentimes it's important to them to feed you. So they want to make sure that you have a piece of cake, or you have a stale cookie, or a cup of tea, or something like that. That you can't come into the house and not have something, even when you look around and you see that there's so little that they themselves have, but to them it's very important that you take that. But again, back to the secondary trauma though, we mostly see it within the relationships, the structures within the families, the relationships within the families, and that constant need to know what's going on with their adult children, and then again, the adult children will often struggle back and come on, enough's enough already, let me live my own life, and the survivor isn't able to do that. They need to know at all times where their child is, who are they working for, where are they going, when are you going to be home? So those are the kinds of things that we really see a lot of. Debbie, do you have more to add?
Yeah, no, that was good.
Yeah, I think a big reason for that, and we see it, is a lot of the children of survivors will contact us. I'm not sure if it's really a guilt thing, but they just feel like they have to advocate beyond maybe what their family member expects out of them, because it's,
right.
A lot of them maybe didn't know that their parents were Holocaust survivors until later in life, and now they feel like they really have to step up their game and make sure that they're receiving everything that they need. There's a lot of dynamics, it's just the way that that they were raised, and through the generations, like any culture, the way that you're raised, you carry that with you.
I do think that the language barrier plays in the generational implications, because some of the things that you normally would not discuss with your adult children, you have to discuss with them, because they have to be your interpreter to the doctor or to the case manager. So dads don't usually tell their daughters about problems that they're having with their prostate or something, but they need their daughter to understand what's going on so she can explain to the case manager that what kind of provider the person needs or has. So.
Yeah, and a lot of family members become their caregivers, so it's also a pride thing.
Yeah.
Okay, we have another question for ODA. It says, I know presenters noted the definition of a Holocaust survivor being a Jewish person who survived the Holocaust. But what is ODA's stance regarding the definition, as other sources define Holocaust survivors as both Jewish and non-Jewish survivors, as other groups were also persecuted during this time, and or those who fled or went into hiding locally, not of Jewish descent? How is this addressed?
Thank you. This is Dan Seguin from the Ohio Department of Aging. And when we, in Ohio, when we look to serve folks that are in most of need in services, and when we talk about coordinating an aging network, we're looking at providing services to folks that are most in economic need, folks that have experienced disabilities as a result of aging and disabilities themselves, the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender population has actually been identified as part of the Older Americans Act, those older folks that are in that group of being folks that are at risk because of a lack of caregiving support, because of maybe economic situations. So specifically to answer that, I think that I don't know that we have total alignment, but many of the folks that potentially that are now older adults that might have been persecuted, which my understanding would be folks that were Jewish, folks that were LGBTQ, folks that had disabilities were often folks that were put in positions where they were victims of persecution. And I think that aligns very closely with the folks that we want to make sure that we're providing outreach to across the state through our aging network, and to be able to provide really targeted, responsive services to.
Yeah, I just want to make sure like that definition is through the claims conference for the Holocaust survivors that get funding through the claims conference. Unfortunately, that organization specifically is only funding for the Jewish population that were persecuted. I know through the state and other organizations would be able to serve non-Jewish.
And then we received multiple comments that this was a great presentation and very well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Okay.
Okay. Well, yeah, I just want to, our emails are on there for all the presenters, and, you know, if you think of any other questions or you need any assistance, you know, don't hesitate to email us.
Okay, great. And this is Jane again. I just want to thank everyone for attending and participating today, and thank you for your questions and comments. We will follow up with the slides and the link to the recording. And thank you again to our presenters. We're so grateful to have hosted today. So thank you all, and I hope you have a great day. Thank you.